Good morning, and welcome to the fourth and final day of Corporate Council on Africa's Leaders Forum on resilient U.S.-Africa business engagement to drive post-COVID-19 recovery. I'm Liser, President and CEO of Corporate Council on Africa, the leading U.S. business association focused solely on connecting business interests in Africa. Thank you for joining us today. I want to start by thanking Their Excellencies President Kenyatta of Kenya and President Akufo-Addo of Ghana for accepting our invitation to participate in today's panel and session. It's a real honor to have you both. I'm also deeply thankful to the sponsors and media partners of this Leaders Forum. They are AfroBridge, Afro-Tourism, Caterpillar, Citi, Covington and Burling, Creative Associates, Development Finance International, Flutterwave, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, Procter and Gamble, Rabin Martin, and Visa. And our media partners are All Africa, APO Group, and Jeune Afrique. Your support of this forum during these unprecedented times shows how committed you are to CCA and to strengthening and advancing U.S.-Africa trade and investment. Now I'm delighted that Demetrios Marantis, Senior Vice President, Global Government Engagement for Visa, has agreed to offer welcome remarks to kick off this session. Demetrios has tremendous trade experience as a prior acting U.S. trade representative, deputy USTR, and associate general counsel of USTR. And I was honored to serve under him while he was there at USTR. He also served as chief international trade counsel for the Senate Finance Committee and held several private sector positions. He joined Visa in 2015, and Demetrios is a board member of CCA and also a friend of mine. Demetrios, thank you for starting us off today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Flory, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody to the fourth and final day of the Corporate Council on Africa Leaders Forum. My name is Demetrios Marantis, and as Flory mentioned, I lead Visa's global government engagement work and our partnerships with governments in the 200 plus countries and territories in which Visa operates. Thank you so much to Flory and CCA for bringing us together and inviting me to begin today's session on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, trade in Africa. First, I hope everyone is healthy and okay. This pandemic has been deeply destructive for families, economies, and businesses, and is challenging us to think and work differently. This virtual forum is a perfect example. From here in Washington, D.C., I am now interacting with government and private sector leaders from San Francisco to Port Louis, and in cities and time zones in between all. It's incredible, and frankly, it's a format we may not have thought feasible at the beginning of 2020. Thank you to Flory and to CCA for making this possible. The past 3 days have given me new optimism about the US-Africa partnership in times of crisis. In Africa, this new normal has accelerated the pace of digitization in all aspects of life, how we communicate, how we work, and how we spend money. In the payment sector in particular, one clear trend that we see is the rapid advance of e-commerce. In April alone, we saw an 18% increase in the volume of e-commerce globally. In Kenya, 71% of surveyed consumers are ordering groceries online for the first time. In South Africa, e-commerce grew 28% between April and May as in-person spending declined. These consumer preferences and behaviors are here to stay. And for small businesses, that means they need to get online to stay relevant, resilient, and participate in the recovery that will come. As the world's leader in digital payments, Visa embraces our responsibility to support Africa's digital readiness and economic recovery. We're doing this in 3 ways. First, we're partnering with governments across Africa to digitize payments, such as salaries and disbursements in countries ranging from Cote d'Ivoire to South Africa. Second, we're focusing on bringing Africa's micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises into the digital economy. Just this week, Visa announced our commitment to help 50 million small businesses globally to become digitally enabled in the next 3 years. And that follows on the Visa Foundation's $200 million commitment to help micro and small businesses, particularly those that are women-owned, recover. Third, we are enabling innovation in payments by working with fintechs, telcos, and mobile money providers across Africa to reach more consumers and small businesses. For example, we are enabling cross-border remittances with the Pan-African fintech MFS Africa. We are also introducing low-cost QR code acceptance for merchants with Ghana's Express Pay. And with Kenya's Safaricom, we are enabling M-Pesa users to engage in e-commerce across borders. We're passionate about these opportunities in Africa, and the crisis has crystallized their relevance and the role of digital in all aspects of our lives, our work, and trade. As the world recovers, securing the ability of micro and small businesses to get online and engage in e-commerce is more important than ever. Digital trade rules can help. African leaders have already risen to the task of creating new rules for trade before the crisis. I commend His Excellency President Kenyatta for his leadership in initiating negotiations for a Kenya-US free trade agreement. I also congratulate His Excellency President Akufo-Addo of Ghana on Ghana's successful bid to host the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. As leaders in both trade and payments, Kenya and Ghana have a unique role in shaping the future of digital trade in Africa and beyond. These leaders know that high-quality trade agreements that provide a level playing field, support interoperability, encourage technology neutrality, and allow data to flow across borders will encourage the development of competitive digital ecosystems that spur innovation, attract investment, and create jobs. These conditions will accelerate getting small businesses online and will give Africa's vibrant startups and entrepreneurs access to technology and services that support their growth, innovation, and ability to scale across borders. With that, it is my great pleasure to turn to my friend, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, former US Ambassador to Liberia, and holder of so many diplomatic posts across the world. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield will lead us in an insightful and dynamic discussion with His Excellencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Demetrios. And let me start by thanking Flory and the CCA team for putting on this amazing program over the past week. I know many of you have participated throughout the week, and you will agree it's been extraordinary. I now have the distinct pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce His Excellencies President Kenyatta of Kenya and President Akufo-Addo of Ghana. Your Excellencies, it's wonderful to see you again on this very new medium that we have all grown used to over the past 3 months. And let me just start by welcoming you to the CCA Leaders Forum. We look forward to hearing your views on resilient US-Africa business engagement post-COVID-19 recovery. And while neither of these two presidents need an introduction to this audience, I still have to share some brief highlights on both of them before I call on them to speak. So I'll start with President Kenyatta. Good morning, Mr. President. President Kenyatta is the fourth and the current president of Kenya. He has been in office since April of 2013, and he's had a long and outstanding career in politics, having served in a variety of positions in previous governments. He served as a member of parliament for Gatundu South constituency, beginning in 2002. He was appointed Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Trade in April of 2008. And in that same year, he was transferred to the Treasury as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance as part of the Grand Coalition Cabinet, where he served until January of 2012. President Kenyatta is the first son of founding President Jomo Kenyatta. He was born at the dawn of Kenya's independence, and he carries his name Uhuru, which means freedom. President Kenyatta attended Amherst College in Massachusetts, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in politics and economics. Now for President Akufo-Addo. His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo was sworn in on January 7, 2017 as the fifth president of Ghana's fourth republic. I had the honor of attending that inauguration. He has been a prominent champion of human rights, rule of law, justice, freedom, and democracy in Ghana for his entire adult life. As a lawyer, he undertook many of the most important constitutional cases of the modern era in Ghana, which protected the independence of the judiciary, the rights of citizens to demonstrate without police permit, and the right of equal access of all political parties to the state-owned media. President Akufo-Addo has held numerous positions and played an active role in the public life of Ghana. He was a three-term MP from 1997 to 2008. He served as Attorney General and Minister of Justice from 2001 to 2003, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from April of 2003 to July of 2007. Now may I turn the floor over to His Excellency President Kenyatta. We're not hearing President Kenyatta. Not sure if it's still on mute. Still not hearing. So President Kenyatta, while we're waiting on your mute to go live, I think it might be in concern over time. I will turn to President Akufo-Addo, and we'll come back to you if that's okay with you. Thank you. President Akufo-Addo.
So, thank you very much. I thank the President of the Corporate Council on Africa, Florizelle, and her executives for organizing this important leaders forum and for the invitation extended to me to deliver these brief remarks. Let me say a big hello to one of the leading voices on our continent, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya. Habari, Uhuru. And I'm particularly happy to see my good friend, Assistant Secretary of State Linda Thomas-Greenfield again, looking so hale and hearty. We'll all agree that this novel disease, COVID-19, has thrust the whole world into unknown and uncharted territory, and we're having to learn as we go along. That is why we have adopted a whole of Ghana approach and put in place measures to contain the spread of COVID-19 virus. Since the 11th of March, I've been regularly addressing the country on the efforts government has made to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. We've chalked some modest successes, with our country thus far recording some 15,473 confirmed cases, with 11,431 recoveries representing some 74% of positives. This means that currently we have 3,947 active cases, having conducted one of the highest number of tests on the continent, with 30 persons severely and critically ill and 95 sad deaths, constituting 0.6% of positives, one of the lowest death rates in the world. While ensuring that we protect the lives of our people, we're also having to ensure that we limit the devastating impact of the virus on our economy. The impact on the Ghanaian economy, and indeed on other African countries, has come in two forms, namely the effects of the global economic slowdown and the effects of the decline in domestic productive activities, in trade, investments, agriculture, and the operations of the financial sector. In response to the pandemic, I mandated initially the creation of the $250 million United States coronavirus alleviation program we call CAP, to support households and micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. Its intent was to help minimize job losses and stimulate economic revitalization by mobilizing private and public sector finances to expand industrial output for domestic consumption and exports. Out of this amount, 42 million United States dollars were used to provide food for the vulnerable and free water for all Ghanaians for 3 months, that is in the month of April, May, and June. 555 million United States dollars were used to motivate our health workers, and 100 million United States dollars was provided in assistance to support micro, small, and medium-scale businesses. Further, government has absorbed electricity bills for 1 million active Lifeline customers. These are the poorest category of customers, and granted a 50% subsidy on electricity bills of all other customers, again for the months of April, May, and June. In total, the relief on electricity is some $200 million. Government has also secured a $1 billion United States rapid credit facility from the IMF without any precondition to help close the financing gap that has been created by the pandemic through shortfalls in revenues and unbudgeted additional expenditure. A $520 million United States credit and stimulus package from the commercial banks, made with the support of the central bank, the Bank of Ghana, has been instituted also to revitalize industries, especially in the pharmaceutical, hospitality, services, and manufacturing sectors. Through efforts from the Ministers for Finance of Ghana and South Africa, who are the co-chairs of the Committee of African Finance Ministers. A 9-month debt standstill from the World Bank has been negotiated for all qualifying members of the IDA, totaling some 44 billion United States dollars for the countries of Africa. In the case of Ghana, this results in a freeze in principal and interest payments for the year, amounting to some 500 million United States dollars. This has created greater fiscal space to enhance the resilience of the Ghanaian economy. In all, government has established an 18 billion United States Ghana COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises program, which we call Ghana Cares, whose aim over the next 3 years is to stabilize, revitalize, and transform our national economy through the improvement of the country's business climate and support for the private sector. We've seized the opportunity that has emerged from this pandemic to enhance the capacity of our domestic private sector to produce many of our essential products, with the pharmaceutical and garment sectors in the lead. Government has procured some 14 million United States worth of personal protective equipment, such as face masks and medical scrubs, head covers, hospital gowns, from domestic garment and textile manufacturing companies, for frontline health workers, and for students going back to school to prepare and sit for their final exams. It is vital that we maintain the momentum towards the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and mainstream COVID-19 strategies, international plans, given the potential for the AFCFTA to become the game changer for Africa's economic transformation. More than ever, regional and continental integration remain the imperatives of our time to boost our production, strengthen our market, and promote our self-reliance. And in doing so, we're looking very much to strengthening US and Africa trade relations so that these goals, the enhancement of our productive capacity, strengthening the African market, promoting our self-reliance, can be the mutual objective of this enhanced trade relations between our two countries, our two continents. There's so much that can be done, both from our end and from the American end, that can promote a stronger economic and trade relation between Africa and the United States. And all of it within the context of an enhanced relationship. We're looking very much forward to the goals of the new United States Development Finance Corporation as fitting in and being in sync with our own national and continental objectives. The AFCFTA, we believe, is going to provide a great opportunity for American businesses to invest in the greater market that this trade area will represent for the world. We're looking forward very much to the exchange, which will enable American technology and investment and know-how to invest in greater and greater quantities within the American market. I thank you very much for the opportunity to make this contribution to this important leaders forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, may I turn the floor over to President Kenyatta. Are we working on it? We look forward to hearing you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I know you have some very important things to say, and that technology is standing in the way of us hearing what you have to say right now. So what I will do at the moment is start the discussion with President Akufo-Addo. Unless I get a message that the mic is going to be opened up in a few minutes, few seconds. Not. Yes, Mr. President, you're still muted. So while we're waiting on President Kenyatta, thank you again, President Akufo-Addo, for your remarks. What I would like to start with is to ask your views on how you see COVID-19 impacting the continent. And you talked about the imperative to continue with the continental free the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area, which is going to be in the Secretariat, which is going to be in Ghana. do you see or foresee any possibilities that this might be delayed?
Well, already, I mean, we know the impacts of the COVID across on all our economies. And I think what's the impact on us is as much as we've seen the impact elsewhere. And already the AU has taken the decision to delay the actual operationalization of the trade area to 2021. To July. Originally, it was meant to begin this very month of, well, next month, as it were, beginning of July. But it's now been taken 6 months further down the road to January of 2021. And hopefully we will all have had a more structured way to keep this COVID at bay. The Secretariat is in Accra. There's no impact on it. In fact, we have done everything that is required for us on our part to get the Secretariat moving. And we're just waiting for the situation to become clearer for it to be going. But it is going to be a major development. And I think it's a development that American businesses and enterprises should interest themselves in strongly, because we're going to have a huge market. We're talking about a market of 1.3 million people with a collective GDP of some 2 trillion American dollars, and with tremendous opportunities for investment in virtually the whole range of economic activity that one can think of, whether it is in manufacturing or in agriculture, investment in technology, in the digitization. All of that are going to be areas which provide a lot of opportunity for American businesses. And we're looking forward very much to seeing how we can develop. Obviously, there are many things that are going to have to change in the COVID environment in terms of flows. I mean, we, for instance, have now committed ourselves to doing whatever we can to strengthen our own domestic productive capacity. We found ourselves in a big bind when the global supply chains were disrupted, seeing to what extent we were so dependent on foreign imports to do even some of the most basic things that an economy has to do. All these are lessons for us, and we are going to promote much greater domestic industrial production and by enhancing and supporting our own local businesses. We're going to put also much greater emphasis on ensuring food security, once again, as a result of the lessons we have learned out of this pandemic. And in doing so, we're going to continue to welcome foreign investment, foreign private investment across board in various sectors of our economy. So we see a lot of opportunity for increased and enhanced US-Africa trade.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm hoping that we were going to have the opportunity to listen to President Kenyatta.
I think we have it.
Finally, are we getting the opportunity?
I think we have it.
Hugging this thing all.
Can you hear me this time, Linda?
I can hear you loud and clear, sir. Welcome.
Thank you, and my sincere apologies for everything that's gone on. I apologize for that. Well, a good morning to all of you, and let me just say once again, it's wonderful to join you this morning, and to my brother, Nana, it's a good afternoon, I believe, same as we are here, just a couple of hours behind us. And good morning to everybody who's out in the States. And let's say that we appreciate the lead that the Corporate Council on Africa has taken in trying to promote business and investment relations between the United States and Africa since it was first established in 1993. I take the opportunity also to applaud the Council for seizing this moment, a critical moment when all of us are facing very severe challenges, and to use the current crisis as an opportunity to recalibrate and to reinvigorate the US-Africa business engagement. In particular, I appreciate the spirit of understanding and the spirit that underpins this forum, which is to conduct in a manner that ensures our respective countries and economies emerge out of this crisis more strong and more resilient. And there's no doubt that the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis has hit all our countries hard, but it has revealed our world's vulnerabilities, but also our inequalities. The effect of the pandemic has overwhelmed the health systems globally and exacerbated unemployment, kept students out of schools, disrupted global value chains and supply chains, and precipitated a huge looming debt crisis in many developing countries across the world. In Kenya, we have had relatively few COVID-19 cases, just over 5,000 or so positive cases with 130 fatalities. And this occurred in the first 100 days since the confirmation of the first case. The numbers could have been higher, but we moved swiftly to institute robust containment measures. We closed our borders, closed our schools, and prohibited large gatherings. We increased testing, contact tracing, quarantine measures, in addition to intensifying social distance and other hygiene protocol requirements. Containment measures have indeed saved lives. However, they have too led to economic contraction, loss of jobs and livelihoods, especially in the informal sector, as well as the service sector, in particular tourism and our hotel industry. My government had to move fast to put in place measures to cushion the most vulnerable members of our society, and we extended similar measures to the business sector. But the crisis has also brought to the fore our resilience and capacity as a global community, but also as individual countries. Interestingly and indeed encouraging, our emerging manufacturing sector has demonstrated unprecedented resourcefulness. The sector is producing currently in Kenya personal protective equipment and is making major breakthroughs in manufacturing medical equipment, including ventilators. We have also harnessed digital technologies to roll out e-learning for schools, provide digital payments for vulnerable individuals, and to convey timely health public information to our citizens. At a continental level, under the umbrella of the African Union, we are coordinating our continental efforts to combat COVID-19, including the rollout of the African Medical Supply Platform, and a concerted global effort has led to an agreement on debt service moratorium to support debt-stressed countries, which is virtually all of us. So therefore, to jumpstart our economies, we need to put investment and trade at the front and center of our recovery strategies. Through duty-free and quota-free preferential market accesses under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, Kenya and other African countries have registered significant growth in their exports. However, to reverse the COVID-related economic decline, we need massive injection of investment capital into our economies and a quantum increase in our exports as well. Indeed, as we're all aware, the AGOA arrangement is set to expire in 2025. And Kenya is particularly keen to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United States that is based on international trade law and the WTO general principles, and one that promotes preferential and mutually beneficial trade, investment, and economic relations. We seek to conclude an FTA that protects emerging industrial and agricultural sectors in Kenya, and one that leads to the creation of decent jobs and sustainable livelihoods for our people. And we expect that the FTA will lead also to an increase in foreign direct investment into Kenya, but also into the rest of Africa, which in turn catalyze linkages in supply value chains across the entire African region. Linda, let me conclude by urging all of us, and in this I support the sentiments of my brother Nana, for us to seize this COVID-19 crisis to collaborate more closely, not just to fight the pandemic, but also to recover together and to generate new trade, investment, and economic opportunities between Africa and the United States. And all of this based on shared prosperity for our respective countries. So, as opening remarks, Linda, that's what I have to say, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you all this morning and afternoon.
Good. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I'm so happy that technology finally worked for us, because we really wanted to hear what you had to say. So I won't pose the exact same question to you that I posed to President Akufo-Addo on the impact of COVID, because I think you addressed that in your remarks. But from the US perspective, I think we would all be interested in whether you see that there will be any changes in the approach to and the relevance of Kenya US free trade agreement discussions. Are those moving forward? How have they been impacted by this crisis?
Despite the fact that we have had this health pandemic, we have continued to engage through various outlets. Our ambassador in Washington himself has been aggressively engaged in this process. So I believe we're still on schedule to start our negotiations, which are scheduled to start in July 7th. And that's an important date because, you know, we did agree, and for us, the Africa free trade area is something that is very important to us. Ghana, Kenya were among the leading countries that pushed for this Africa free trade arrangement. And under that arrangement, what we did agree is that all negotiations would come into play as soon as the Africa free trade agreement came into effect. So that's July, the first week of July, July 7th in particular. And our negotiations with the United States are scheduled to start on the very same day. So I am myself quite confident. All the preliminaries have gone well. And I do believe, as I have always stated, that if we are successful in these negotiations, Kenya then can act as sort of the lead or the guide, so that many other African countries can also follow suit. So we will be the guinea pig, and I am certain that we will be able, together with our friends in the United States, to reach an agreement that would encourage all our brothers and sisters on the continent to sort of follow suit and to join in, so that ultimately we can achieve our key objective, which is to increase the volume of trade and investment between the African continent and the United States of America. And I believe that everything so far is actually on course, and we are all very keen and excited, and our teams are very keen and excited, raring to go, and we look forward to us being able to kick off these negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Akufo-Addo, can I ask, and I will come back to you with the same question, President Kenyatta, what role do you see the US and Africa private sector playing in the post-COVID recovery? And are there sectors that you think will be more important for the private sector moving forward? President Akufo-Addo.
I think one important development that the private sector in America can pay particular attention to is something that President Kenyatta has alluded to in his remarks, and that is the future of the Africa Growth and Opportunities, the AGOA legislation. Is due to come to an end in 2024. I think it's a good time for us to pause to see whether or not the efforts should be made to extend it, because clearly it has been beneficial. It has permitted many African enterprises to take advantage of its terms to enter the United States market. And as far as I'm concerned, there's every reason why we should look at the possibility of extending it. And to that extent, we would want the support of the private sector in the United States to help us in that exercise of having the extension. But then, when you're talking about energy, you're talking about manufacturing, you're talking about digitization. These are all areas of economic activity in which America has a serious advantage in terms of the technology and the know-how. We believe that these are areas where American technology can be profitably employed on the continent. And especially within the context of this larger market that the AFCFTA, the African Free Trade Area, is going to present. So opportunities are there. The Development Finance Corporation, which is now coming to being, has yet to really take off. We need to work together, the private sectors of both, to see to what extent access to the new capital that is involved there can be facilitated. And generally, the mobilization of funds in America, of investment funds in America for investment in our economies is something that will be very worthwhile. You know, we keep on making, I don't know whether it's a complaint, but a statement that somehow or other we don't get the same involvement. This is why the effort that is being made by the Kenyan leader on the trade agreement between Kenya and the United States is something very, very, very significant and will be very significant for all of us. The emphasis, the emphasis of America on exploring economic opportunities on the continent has not been perhaps as intense as some of us would have wished. I think that the opportunity is now there for us to work together towards that.
Good. Thank you, Mr. President. President Kenyatta.
Well, I agree with what my brother has also just said, but I just want to add and say that I also believe that the post-crisis also has created new opportunities in the health sector, for example. And this is an area I believe that private sector in the United States of America could really have a big head start over many other African countries, given the scale, you know, with companies like GE and so many others who this is a great opportunity for them to invest in the African continent, because as we have seen, the kind of interruptions that we have had in supply chain has made it very difficult for us to be able to move equipment, get drugs, and etc., because of the disruptions caused by this COVID. So I think one of the opportunities is to sort of expand our supply chains and establish new bases in different parts of the world to be able to ease any possibility of future problems in supply chain. I believe that there is great opportunity, for example, in information technology, where again, Kenya, Africa largely is a very young country, very young continent, great potential of working with our young people in information technology. We have a good number of companies that are already now based in Nairobi, working with young people, coming up with new different apps and etc. that are pertinent not only to our continent, but also globally. And those are, again, our areas where we can partner and work closely together. That, on top of agriculture and the fields of construction and bridge building, these are all opportunities, I believe, for American private sector, where they can base themselves here, they can base themselves on this continent. I have always said this is a continent that requires everything from toothbrushes to machine tooling, and a continent with over 1 billion people. And especially when we look at this Africa Free Trade Arrangement that is coming into play, I see huge opportunities for American private sector to set themselves up here, service not only the African continent, but also service other parts of the world in a very, very cost-effective manner, while at the same time helping and working together with us to get these young people employed, to get these young people engaged, and to get these young people the kind of skills that they will require in this increasingly globalized world. So there is a huge potential, I believe, for, and a huge role for the private sector of America. This is something during my many visits to your headquarters, I have always reiterated again and again and again that this is the opportune time to invest, to trade, to partner with Africa. This is the best time in the world.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I've been informed that we have run out of time, but I wonder if you might want to make a few closing remarks. I got a lot of questions from nearly 300 members of the audience. We have not opened it up for the audience, but just one that was related to Kenya was, when was Kenya Airlines going to resume, and noting that Kenya is an important marketplace. I also want to take the opportunity to thank President Akufo-Addo. I got a message that he had to run because we did go out of time. So I will turn it to you to make final comments, and then I'll turn it back over to our host.
Thank you very much, Linda. And mine, first and foremost, just to answer the question on KQ, we are going to be starting domestic flights, and this is what we're going to use as our trial over the, let's say, next couple of days, because we are opening up the lockdown that we have had between inter-county lockdown. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to set the pace for getting a date for us to open up now once again to international flights. We have seen that if you don't take the necessary precautions, if you don't put in place the necessary measures, opening up too quickly also has its downside, as we have seen in different parts of the world. So we are very eager to open up, but at the same time, we're also eager to make sure that we all stay safe, that we all stay healthy, and we save lives. So it's that balancing, and we are doing everything that we can to make sure we're back in the skies. I think in closing remarks is just to say that I can't emphasize enough the importance I attach to this month of July when we are kicking off these discussions. I have always said that the United States of America, in the early stages of our countries or the dawn of independence, the United States was heavily involved, participated, helped very many liberation movements. Thurgood Marshall, who helped us draft our first constitution, pushing and the United Kingdom to end empire. And you were heavily involved in Africa. A lot of the companies that still exist today started their business on this continent in the early 60s. But for one reason or another, that appetite was lost. Yes, we did go through a very difficult period in the 80s and the 90s where there were governance issues and so many other things. But we have turned that corner. And I think, Linda, you can bear witness that the majority of Africa has turned that corner. And we are now operating in a completely different environment. We are focused on private sector. We are getting more and more business-friendly rules and laws and regulations, understanding that it is the private sector that drives business. It's the private sector that's going to help us create jobs. So we can't forget the past, but let's not live in that past. Let us work together to create a new shared future that is based on the values and principles that we share and have shared from the time of our independence. Welcome, and let's do business. Let's get this ball rolling.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you to President Akufo-Addo, who has already departed. I know that we're all sending you a virtual hand of applause from all over the world, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and to work with your team on the future of Kenya, Africa, and the United States. I now turn the floor over to our leader, Liser, the head of CCA, to chair the next panel.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, and thank you, Your Excellencies, President Kenyatta and President Akufo-Addo. We know he had to leave, but thank you so much, President Kenyatta, for being here, President Akufo-Addo, for your very valuable insights and perspectives. So before I invite the panelists to join the second part of our session, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules for questions. Please use the Zoom chat function to send us your questions. We look forward to asking them if there's enough time. We know that we have a top-level panel and our discussion will be very intense, but we will try to take questions if we can. Those who send in questions, please make sure that you provide your name and your affiliation. So I'd like to start by inviting our distinguished panelists to join me. Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Tewol Gebremariam, the Group CEO of Ethiopian Airlines. Vilo Triska, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Procter and Gamble, Southern Africa. And Jeff Hardy, the Government Affairs Director for Asia Pacific, Africa, and the Middle East for Caterpillar. Taken together, these members of this panel have a wealth of Africa trade and investment experience. Welcome to all of you. So Wamkele, let me start with you. First question to you. How will COVID-19 impact the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, not just in terms of shifted timelines, but maybe in priorities and the rollout of the AfCFTA? Welcome, Wamkele.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Flory. Thank you so much to you and CCA for inviting me and for over the years being a very, very good partner to Africa. I appreciate this invitation. I think as the president said, President Akufo-Addo, as he said, there is a timeline issue of 6 months, the shift in the implementation, or rather in the trading date. But in terms of priorities, what COVID-19 has underscored is that Africa requires to accelerate industrial development and to accelerate the establishment of regional value chains, and to ensure that Africa is able to move up on the global value chains, and to ensure that Africa's productive capacity is significantly enhanced. I think the fact that we see a crisis in terms of the equipment that we need, the tools that we need to fight the pandemic, the personal protection equipment, the ventilators that we as Africans have had to import them from outside, and we've had to battle this and have to engage in this battle for a fight to have these products imported into Africa because of the competition for these goods in the global market. So this underscores the point for Africa to accelerate industrialization, and that creates an opportunity, as President Kenyatta was saying, it creates an opportunity for investment. It creates an opportunity for investors in the US to invest in value chains in Africa, in productive manufacturing in Africa, in capital equipment in Africa, in services, to invest in services, in financial services in Africa, which we know is the backbone of Africa's manufacturing. And so I think we now have a new focus, and this new focus is acceleration of Africa's industrial development. Whether you are talking about trade in goods or trade in services, we have got to make sure that we accelerate our industrial development.
Thank you, Wamkele. And just a quick question, just to clarify, when is the date now for actually implementing the AFCFTA? I think it was going to be July 1 of this year. Can you help us in understanding what will now actually happen?
Well, we have, we recommended 1st of July is not practical, it's not possible. We heard from the heads of states, they set out the challenges that are related to COVID-19. Out of 55 countries in Africa, 42 are under a full or partial lockdown. Borders are closed except for transit of critical goods. And so under these conditions, it's not possible when governments are focused on fighting the pandemic, which in my view is quite sensible and quite responsible. Saving African lives is the priority. When governments are focused on that, we need to give them the space to defeat the pandemic. What we recommended as a secretariat, working with our partners and the ambassadors here in Ethiopia, is that heads of states should postpone the implementation, the trading date rather, from the 1st of July to the soonest possible date. We proposed to our heads of states the 1st of January 2020. We hope that the heads of states will accept that recommendation. It gives us time to defeat the pandemic. It gives us time for the health expertise to put in place the measures that we need for travel to happen, for commerce to restart. And most importantly, it gives us time as a trade and as a secretariat and trade professionals to get back to the drawing board, to resume our work and to redouble our efforts. Because I think, as you heard the two presidents saying, the stimulus package for Africa is implementation of this agreement. We don't have $3 trillion. We don't have $60 billion for an airline industry. What we do have is the potential for Africa to boost intra-Africa trade through this agreement and to significantly enhance the potential for recovery year on year post COVID-19 through implementation of this agreement.
Thank you very much, Wamkele. And I just want to make sure it's January 1 of 2021 that we're hoping this will happen. Now, let me turn to Mr. Gebramariam, Group CEO of Ethiopian Airlines. And sir, we're delighted to have you here. I just have to tell you that my very last trip to the continent, I went to Addis and then to Nairobi in February, and I was on Ethiopian Airlines. And so I was really pleased that you were still flying, that I could get into the continent and actually still get back home. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, what has been the impact, sir, of COVID-19 on trade and tourism in Africa, and particularly on the future of African aviation?
Thank you, Flori, President of CCA, Excellency Heads of States, Excellency Ministers, Excellency the US Acting Secretary of State, Excellency Ambassadors, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to join you this morning, and good morning to everybody. Thank you, Flori, for traveling with us in February. And by the way, we are still flying. We have not suspended flights, so it's a good memory, and we can also fly you now wherever you want. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you also for arranging this forum in this global pandemic and global crisis. It is highly appreciated. Well, you know, COVID-19 has devastated the world, and of course, Africa included. The the tourism and aviation industry is the most affected, as you can imagine. People are not moving. More than 1/3 of the global population is under lockdown. More than 1.5 billion students are sitting at home. They are not going to school. So, I mean, it goes without, it doesn't need explanation that this has really crippled the entire world. And when it comes to Africa, though the human cost is, thanks to God, is not as bad as in the rest of the world. The total confirmed cases are also on the lower side in the entire continent of Africa. But in trying to manage the crisis and in trying to control the spread of the virus, the entire continent is almost on lockdown. That means entire economies are affected, no tourism industry to speak of, and no airline is flying. So it is really, really bad. And but let me take this opportunity. I think there are a lot of lessons that we need, as Africans, we need to learn. And my friend and my colleague, His Excellency Mr. Wamkele, will be the one to join me that, you know, the absence of vibrant trade relations within and among African countries and African people has made us very, very vulnerable. I think it stands around 16%. I mean, 16% of African trade is within itself, and the rest is with the rest of the world. And when you compare that with the European Union, it's 60 versus 16. While the African Union is as old as the European Union. So we should have achieved a lot. And I think the Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to help. Of course, I heard that because of the COVID, it's going to be delayed. But we have been very vulnerable, and COVID-19 has witnessed this, and we learn a lot. Ethiopia exports, I always say this analogy, Ethiopia exports and Kenya export flour to Europe, and most of African countries, West African countries, import the same flour to West Africa. So this shows how badly we are disconnected in terms of trade, investment, and tourism and our service. And that has affected us very, very much. So, but I would like to take this opportunity also to inform participants that Africa is still well connected with good airlines like Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways, South African Airways, Egypt Air, and so on. Although we lack a lot of inter-Africa connectivity, but when we see Africa with the rest of the world, it is well connected by some African countries, but airlines, but also by non-African airlines. So the African aviation industry is highly affected, but before the COVID-19, it was already sick. And COVID-19 already made it worse. Otherwise, we were in a very bad shape as an industry. So we learn a lot. And as far as Ethiopian Airlines is concerned, we have not stopped flights. We are still flying to almost all destinations in Europe. We are still flying to New York, Washington, and Chicago, Toronto, Brazil, and almost all African countries. The only thing that we are not doing right now is we are not carrying as many passengers as we used to. But we are carrying cargo to most of the destinations. And we have been a very good support, logistical support to I'll explain that later. But I think African economies are highly affected, mainly because of the lockdown. Export is very, very weak, almost non-existent. Not only because of the demand, but also because of the supply, because the production capacity is significantly diminished. People are locked down at home. Tourism is dead, and commodity prices. That is the other impact, that commodity prices have gone down, and particularly oil. So the oil exporting countries are again double affected. So I mean, this is a very, very tough challenge.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You've given us a good overview of the impact on businesses and particularly airlines, not just Ethiopia, but across the continent. Let me turn now to Vila Triska of Procter and Gamble to get maybe the perspective from a U.S. company. So Vila, how are U.S. companies in particular like Procter and Gamble adapting to COVID-19 and also preparing strategically for the post-COVID-19 reality? And are there any lessons that you can share from a U.S. corporate perspective?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Flori, and good afternoon to all of the participants from Africa. I'm happy to be here. Before I share the learning on COVID-19, let me go a little bit back and share some of the history of P&G in Africa. And I'll try to put in the context. We've been in Africa for a little bit over 60 years. And over the time, we have built our production capabilities in Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa, and as well as expanded our presence through offices in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana. Now, over the 60 years, we have created over 25,000 direct and indirect jobs in Africa, and then we worked with hundreds of small and medium enterprises in our sustained training and development programs. Now, money-wise, we have invested over $2 billion in capital in Africa only, and we are reviewing investment opportunities regularly. Our last investment was our femcare production capacity in South Africa, which was announced in November last year during President Ramaphosa investment conference here in South Africa. And it increased our local production employment, manufacturing employment by 30%. Now, on top of our sort of economical investments, we are also investing socially. Our social programs touch over 50 million children across 17 African countries with our health and hygiene education programs. And I still remember us sitting last year in Mozambique, Maputo, talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and how great it's going to help the countries and economies of the continent. And here we are a year later, living in a completely different world. And as all the guests mentioned, the pandemic has completely changed both business and public sector lives. And I think, as a company, we had to shift gears and adopt. And for us, the call which we made as a company was that we will protect our employees first. Okay, that was the first and most important thing. What we've done is actually we took some of the government-imposed regulations and we went well beyond them. When it comes to offices, for those people who could work from home, we allow them and enable them to work from home. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we try to comply, beyond the regulations with the country's lockdowns. When it comes to manufacturing, most of our products which we produce in African continent are considered to be essentials when it comes to health or hygiene. So we scaled the operations to prevent the social distancing in the plants, to enable continuous operations. We ensure transportation of our essential personnel from their homes to our plants to ensure that they are not exposed to COVID-19 during the transport. We obviously use compulsory personal protective equipment. We completely adhere to local or government regulations, and in a lot of cases, we actually go beyond that. We've been also, adjusting our production capacities. In some of our plants, we started to produce face masks in our global Gillette operations, instead of making blades and razors, we started to produce face shields, which we are donating to frontline healthcare workers. And in some of our plants, we actually scale the production of our Safeguard hand sanitizers. So that was some of the learnings which we had to implement or through the crisis and through the pandemic. Now, when it comes to consumers, I think there is a significant shift in consumers' realities. And one of the biggest things which we experienced was changing shopping behavior. Consumers want convenient shopping. And I saw one of the comments on the chat said, please don't kill retail through e-commerce. We are not trying to kill the retail. I think the people are choosing convenience, and it depends on the retailer how they want to address that convenience. In a lot of the cases, it's online. People want to order online. In a lot of the cases, they want to go to the store, okay? But instead of going to 2-3 different stores, they want to have the choice in one of their stores. So we had to adjust as a company to all these consumer realities. When it comes to consumer demands, obviously, as you could expect, health and hygiene are #1 priorities now. And we see, increased demands and also changing behaviors on how people use some of the health and hygiene products. And we had to address those. And last one, which I would like to mention is, we call it do-it-yourself. And it's not do-it-yourself in original sense, like building, home furniture. But it's a lot of things which were done externally in salons, hairdressers. Consumers are moving it and doing those habits at home. So again, having the right product and available in the market is one of those things which are helping us to address the changing consumer needs. Obviously, we've been working with our online partners to increase our offering and deliver on the changing needs of consumers. And then the last one is working with the governments. And I'm happy to say that we've been working closely with governments to developing the policies which promote health and hygiene as we went through the early stages of the crisis. And I must say that it was learning for both public and private sector. But the crisis pushed us to work actually together and bring best out of both as we went through the crisis. So from my side, I can mention technology. A lot of governments are working with the business partners and asking inputs online for the new policies which are coming to the place, which governments are implementing. And I find this very, very helpful. And I hope that this will remain a good practice going forward and will help us to implement or accelerate implementation of some of the new policies going forward.
Thank you very much, Vila. So let me turn now. That was a good sort of summary of the kinds of things that fast-moving consumer goods companies like Procter and Gamble are doing. Let me turn now to Jeff Hardy of Caterpillar, where the issues that affect infrastructure may be a bit different. Now, Jeff, many Africans see the potential for global supply chains to shift more to the continent post-COVID. How realistic is that? Especially given some of the new tendencies that have come up in terms of trade, and how can US companies like Caterpillar play a role in terms of the new value chains, the new global supply chains, and particularly I'd like your thoughts on the infrastructure sector and the role that it plays in post-COVID recovery.
Well, thank you very much, Flori, for the question. And first, I'd like to just thank you for the invitation to participate in this important panel, such distinguished panelists that I'm joined on the panel with, and I really appreciate the opportunity. This has been a really fascinating 3 days of discussions heretofore with the kickoff of President Rwanda and Kagame, and then today joined by 2 presidents, Kenyatta and President Akufo-Addo. So it's really been a fabulous discussion. And I do think that it's really an exciting time for trade in Africa. I agree that it does present some extraordinary opportunities. So what I'd like to do is address your question by saying why I think it does, suggest how to capture the opportunities and provide information on Caterpillar's experience in Africa between the why and the how to put it into context. So first, why? Well, why is there potential for global supply chains to shift more to the continent now? We know COVID-19 has impacted many of the economies in Africa, and post-COVID-19, the drivers are going to continue. And so these include population growth, which we've heard before, 1.2 billion to maybe 2.5 billion by 2050. Urbanization is taking place. Tremendous infrastructure needs really across the continent. And it's not unique to Africa, but infrastructure needs everywhere, but a lot of infrastructure needs in Africa. And now there is new attention being looked at supply chains. So given the growth in demand and then the new attention to supply chains, Africa does have every opportunity to attract the investment. So what ingredients are missing though to be able to attract this investment? And to put it in context, let me just say that Caterpillar has been in the continent for over 90 years. We appointed our first dealer in Tunisia in 1926. That was in fact our first international dealer. So we've been in the continent for over 90 years. And since then, our products have been involved in really all aspects of infrastructure development: highways, roads, bridges, ports, dams. We power large buildings in power plants also. We power hospitals. We're developing mineral resources. We've been involved in marine and rail transportation. So really across the board. And today, Caterpillar and our independent dealers have over 15,000 employees across the continent, and we're represented in nearly every country. And our independent dealers include Barlow World Equipment, Mantrac, Tractafrique, Invention, African, other dealers as well. And we also have Caterpillar subsidiaries, Progress Rail, Solar Turbines, Perkins. So we're very well represented in the African continent. And our customers are in infrastructure, power, mining, transportation, and what they demand is uptime of the equipment. Everything has to work. So despite the progress made over the years to the regional economic community agreements and African Union level, it's still a challenge to get our independent dealers throughout the continent the right parts and components in a timely manner to serve our customers and keep the Cat equipment up and running. So to help address this issue, in 2017, Caterpillar invested in a new state-of-the-art parts distribution facility in South Africa, Kempton Park. It's the largest such facility in our industry in Africa. And the distribution center supports over 35,000 active machines and engines in Southern Africa. Now, despite this major investment in logistics support for the continent, it can still take more than 20 days to move critical machine and engine components between Southern African countries, and this is pre-COVID. So this reduces competitiveness, causes project delays, and of course adds to cost. So now to the how. It is realistic the supply chains can shift to Africa, but to capture the opportunity, it really does depend on the speed and scope of implementing the much discussed African Continental Free Trade Agreement and completing new high standard bilateral and regional agreements, such as the US-Kenya Free Trade Agreement that is underway. And at the opening of the CCA Leaders Forum, President Kagame, he emphasized the importance of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and also the need to work together as a continent to drive this growth. Africa has competition with large countries, but also with regions that are far more integrated than Africa. So we hope that the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, is going to help reduce the shipping times by cutting red tape at the border, harmonizing customs procedures across the regions, and just enabling quicker movement of goods across regions. Because for supply chains, that really is a critical aspect. Invest in the supply chains, unless you have that to attract investment, it's going to be difficult. Another thing is Caterpillar is currently providing training for South African suppliers. And this too is very important. So far we've trained employees for more than 40 prospective suppliers. And some of these have been integrated into Caterpillar's global supply chain. So a great success story. And our CAT Foundation since 2010 has invested $77 million in projects in Africa. And we're trying to invest in workforce readiness and STEM, in vocational training, water resources management. So the whole thing to try to get more critical mass of skilled workers in the continent. And today, in fact, we just announced investment in South Africa through the South Africa Solidarity Fund. And this one is to support COVID work. But just to summarize, Caterpillar, we definitely see an opportunity for Africa to capitalize on shifting supply chains post-COVID-19. A key is the success for regional integration. It's absolutely essential. And then making big strides with regard to trade facilitation. So these will strengthen the business climate and we think attract investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great summary of not only the business bottom line for Caterpillar on the continent, but also some of the things that you're doing in terms of doing good as well. A number of your CSR projects and others. So we thank you for sharing that. Let me see if Wankele is there. We have some questions that have come in. Yes, he's there. So Wankele, how will, lots of people want to know this, how will the AFCFTA complement bilateral agreements like FTAs, this potential US-Kenya FTA that everyone is excited about? Some are worried about, how will this work with and support AFCFTA? And I thought you could talk about that a bit before I turn back to the chairman of Ethiopian Airlines for some questions for him. Please.
Thanks again, Flori. Let me just say first, join you in saluting Ethiopian Airlines and my senior brother, Gerbre Mariam, for keeping the airline flying and keeping Africa connected. All of the personal protection equipment, the masks, the ventilators have been distributed across the continent by Ethiopian Airlines at a very, very critical time. And so I think as an African, I want to appreciate Ethiopian Airlines for ensuring that we continue to have access to public health. We continue to have access to the equipment that we need to fight the pandemic. And I also say on a personal note that when I am flying to New York in a week's time to visit my wife and my son from Addis Ababa, I will fly Ethiopian Airlines. So I want to thank my senior brother. We intend to build on all the progress that has been made in liberalization of trade in Africa. That is the objective. The African Continental Free Trade Area must ensure that Africa moves and that we significantly improve intra-Africa trade from the 18% where it stands now to higher amounts over time. And as I said, that means that we must establish regional value chains. That means that we must look to see how do we improve productive capacity in Africa. And you can take very, very practical examples. Take the 14 core countries. You and I were trade negotiators before. If we can find investors who will be willing to invest in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in productive capacity in cotton, so that these countries are able to move up the value chain. This is an example of what we mean by the AFCFTA enhancing manufacturing capacity in Africa. Yesterday, the day before, I had a discussion with a global auto manufacturing company that, again, is looking to see how they can invest in productive capacity. And so we're building on all the progress that has already been made by regional economic communities, by individual countries, on AGOA. The president of Ghana mentioned AGOA. There are countries like Lesotho, for example, that because of AGOA have been able to employ over 300,000 people, particularly women, in the area of textiles and clothing who export to the US, particularly to Gap. So the point I make is this: the African Continental Free Trade Area is about market integration. It is about building on the progress that we have made. And so to the extent that, as we heard from President Kenyatta, that countries are saying, we want to go even further than the AFCFTA, the agreement enables that to happen. And so I think that the complementarities are there between the AFCFTA and any other agreement that a particular country may wish to negotiate pursuant to its own national development objectives, and of course, in accordance with the rules that are set out in the agreement. The agreement makes it clear you can negotiate as an AFCFTA state party with whoever you want to negotiate with, provided, of course, you provide the same treatment or even better to an AFCFTA state party based on reciprocity. So the point is, we want to build on the progress we're making. If Kenya and the US negotiate an agreement, we want to go even beyond that as the AFCFTA. If another country negotiates a third agreement with an agreement with a third country, we will build on that and go even beyond that, because what we want, productive investment to create jobs in Africa so that young Africans stop dying and being buried on the oceans of the Mediterranean. We create jobs here in Africa. We expand and improve on our manufacturing capacity. We ensure that we have a coherent market from a regulatory point of view so that investors are not subject to different sets of regulations. We want to enhance Africa's investor climate. And so I am very optimistic about the prospects that lie ahead, and as we build on the progress that has been made in regional economic communities, in bilateral investment treaties, and in bilateral FTAs.
Thank you, Wamkele. That's an excellent response to make it clear that the AFCFTA and bilateral FTAs are not mutually exclusive, but can actually support African competitiveness, both in products they ship to each other, as well as to the rest of the world. Let me turn back to Mr. Gabriel, and I wanted to ask a question about how it's been possible. I too commend that Ethiopian Airlines has been able to continue functioning and playing such a critical role in this time. How has it been possible? What kinds of measures to put in place? Because we note that some of the other major airlines on the continent have not been able to get become operational again. And so we just thought, in terms of supporting trade and tourism now, but then maybe if you could just shift to how you see sort of going forward. What will the role of African airline carriers play in intra-African trade, and especially in bringing products back and forth between the continent and the US? We know you ship to other places as well, but we're interested in how you get those products to the US, your cut flowers and value-added agricultural products and all that is coming from the continent, automobiles and so forth. So, sir, share with us a bit. You're on mute, sir. You're on mute. Yes.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Very good question. I think the answer is necessity is a mother of invention. So it was critically important and a matter of survival for us to seek means and ways to continue to fly in the middle of this pandemic. Because if you remember back in February, we've been criticized, in some sorts, that when the rest of the world is not flying, well, It's not the rest of the world. Some airlines stopped flights, some airlines continue. So we were among the airlines that continued. So again, when most of the African countries closed their borders for flight because of the concern of the spread of the virus, and we found ourselves that 90% or 95% of our passenger business was suspended overnight. So, you know, right now we are among very few carriers in the world where we have not taken any bailout money. We have not taken any short-term financing for working capital. We have not laid off any single employee. We have not reduced any salary of our employees. So thus far we are carrying. So what we did was, number one, we wanted to continue flying as much as we can. And we knew that passenger business was gone. So we quickly diverted to cargo. And as you know, we are the largest cargo carrier. In fact, we are the largest airline in Africa by far. But we are also the largest cargo carrier. And in the last 10 years, we have invested heavily in a cargo airplanes, about 10 777, Boeing 777 and 2 737 freighters. We are heavily Boeing airline, and this is a very long relationship. So we have also invested in the cargo terminal. So we have now the largest cargo terminal and the most modern in Addis. So we have used this investment to serve as a logistics hub for the continent. And right there, African countries, as my friend and colleague, Mr. Mentioned before, there was a need for urgent delivery of PPEs. Africa didn't know how to combat with this pandemic, how to prepare itself. The health services, as we know, in Africa are underdeveloped. So we played a very, very significant role in delivering these life-saving, critical medical supplies from China mainly. By the way, it's not only to Africa. We were among the largest carriers of PPE from China to Europe, to Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, UK, Germany, and so on, United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and so on. So the fact that we moved quickly to cargo has helped us a lot. But later on, we also found out that the cargo business, I mean, the demand of PPE and medical supplies was beyond our capacity of cargo airplanes. So we converted 25 passenger airplanes to cargo. By removing their seats, we are still using them. And as a result of that, Addis today is the largest hub for WFP and the entire United Nations humanitarian operation in Africa, and for other suppliers too. So, you know, we were able to move PPE from China for the Jack Ma Foundation to 51 African countries in 6 days. In 6 days. Yeah, so it was important that we did this, and we must have saved a lot of lives in terms of preparation. So this is how we handled it so far. But, you know, the industry in Africa is in a very, very bad shape, African airline industry. So going out of COVID, there will be new opportunities, also new challenges. The industry has found itself in a completely different environment today. So if you will, you know, it is like security issues after September 11, you know. You and I were just going to the airport, board the plane in 30 minutes. We didn't have to worry about security checks and so on before September 11. And now we know what's going on around the airport. And now biosecurity and biosafety is going to be a very, very major issue for customers, for airports, for the traveling public. So we are preparing ourselves to make sure that we provide safe travel to the traveling public. And we have already made changes. We have made wearing masks mandatory. We are disinfecting our airplanes on every departure, and we are disinfecting airport facilities twice a day, and providing all the sanitation inside the airplane and also to our crew. So biosecurity is going to change the airline industry, and we are preparing accordingly.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you brought up some of these newer issues too, because post-COVID, we'll have to take many of these additional factors into account. Let me turn back to Dila, who from Procter and Gamble. You know, Procter and Gamble, you were mentioning earlier, produces a lot of products on the continent in various locations. You're not one of the ones that are shipping back to the U.S. under AGOA, but that's fine. You're supplying this huge market on the continent. And I wondered if you could just share your thoughts on how companies like Procter and Gamble, both as an American company and then working with local African companies, can scale up production of products on the continent. You're in, I think, 6 locations. What are the ways that a company like Procter and Gamble can take advantage of the African continental free trade area, especially because you're focused on providing goods, producing goods, and providing them on the continent? And how can you bring in your African counterparts, companies on the ground, as a part of your value chain?
Yep. Well, for me, I would look into sort of, again, maybe a little bit short term, before the January 1st, which I'm really looking forward, next January 1st, when hopefully we'll see the light to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think, you know, in the current situation, what is important from my perspective or our perspective as a company is the situation in every country is changing at lightning speed when it comes to new regulations, locking down, unlocking. And I think, you know, the dialogue between public and private sector when it comes to, you know, the countries or regions on being clear on and bringing more transparency about trade-related policies and trade-related changes which are influenced by COVID is something which can help short term. And every government is trying to figure this out. But I think, you know, that's the effort where we need to continue working together as one to enable trade and continue trading. And that second thing, which is again short term, is keep the supply chain flowing, especially for, you know, essential products. Okay. And we are operating across the continent. Okay. We have as you mentioned, few production capacities across the region, but for us, we also have, you know, offices or our distributor partners in almost every country in the continent. So for us, you know, ensuring that we can deliver products today to consumers who need it is very important. And we see, you know, a lot of barriers being built. And I'm very, very happy that now I'm moving to something which is long term. I'm very happy to hear that the AFCFTA continues to work, and it's only 6 months delay. That's a great news. With the pandemic, you know, the expectation was that a lot of countries will move to protectionism and will try to protect their own investment, which would not be the right thing for continent. And I'm happy to hear that actually both of the excellencies, President Aku Fado as well as President Kenyatta, have mentioned that they really want to strengthen the AFCFTA and accelerate it further, as well as Secretary General mentioning that there is a strict timeline. So I'm happy to see that. So for me, the AFCFTA will be the one thing which will help us, you know, an American company operating at the continent to grow further. Now, on the second part of your question on how can we work with the local SMEs. Now, if I go way back in time, actually Procter and Gamble was SME when we started. Okay, it was two brothers-in-law, one producing candles, the other one producing soap, starting this small business, which became now a global corporation. And I think, you know, one big benefit of being big corporation, which I see, is that legacy we can leave in the countries where we operate through developing the local companies. And we have a lot of programs where we organize supplier summits, not only for our suppliers, but for people who would like to be our supplier or supplier of any other similar corporation in the country, where we explain and train them on what is it needed, what are the certain standards which companies like us would expect them. And we just had, you know, a great partnership over the last 6 weeks with WeConnect in South Africa, when we've been working with 50 women-owned businesses, small, medium-owned businesses in South Africa, and working with those 50 women and training them to be potentially one of our suppliers. And actually, I must say that, you know, a few of those businesses from the last year's class are actually already working to become one of our suppliers. So I think we have few programs, and it's maybe, you know, reach out to us in the country where you operate. Our procurement is doing a regular research on what is available in the local markets. We want to work with the local companies. It's easier for us. It's becoming more flexible for us to work with the local suppliers than have everything supplied from, you know, other part of the world. So that's something that we're looking forward. And I believe that AFCFTA will increase these opportunities even further, because we will not only focus on the specific country where we operate, but we can source from the whole continent.
Wonderful, wonderful, Vila. So let me turn back to Jeff Hardy. Vila, you touched on something that we've seen with Caterpillar in terms of this thing of partnering with local companies, because we know across Africa, local content and building up the capacity of local businesses has been important. I know Caterpillar, at a number of our events, you've had one of your partners on the ground, Barlow World, be a part of a US Africa Business Summit that we've done before. Jeff, tell us a little bit about how, as Africa is now going to be doing this African Continental Free Trade Area, reducing barriers across countries, and then the prospects of a US-Kenya FTA. How do you see Caterpillar as being able to continue what you do so well in terms of working with partners on the ground and promoting those businesses as a part of what you do?
Well, thank you, Flory. So let me just approach it this way. You know, digital technology, it was pervasive prior to COVID-19. We've seen the reliance on technology and connectivity soar even further during this crisis. And some would say that it's advanced technology by 10 years, the use of technology by 10 years. We don't need to look any further than this very event. So, you know, we can still engage, we can still advance with these discussions, we can still connect things to technology that rely on now more than ever. And the other aspect of this is digital trade is becoming a new component of recent US trade agreements. And so we're very glad to learn that the digital trade component commitments, you know, it's going to be a focus in phase 3 of the USFCTA negotiations, and striking the right balance between security, privacy, enabling policy environment that allows technology, e-commerce, connectivity to flourish. It's an important driver for all trade and investment going forward. And this is not just for technology companies. And you might wonder, why is Caterpillar talking about that? Well, Caterpillar is really interested in technology and digital technologies because we have the largest industrial fleet of connected assets in the world. We have over 1 million connected assets. So our dealers that are working with the customers are providing them with machines that are connected. And so they expect these digital services to help them, and they do, make them more productive, more efficient, safer, less wasteful, and ultimately more successful. So from remote, monitoring and diagnostics to fully autonomous mining fleets that are operating in Africa. Caterpillar equipment is more connected now than ever before. And restrictions on cross-border data flows, localization requirements for servers, SIM cards, and computing assets, that it stifles trade in many ways. And so we think this is a real opportunity for Africa trade policy post-COVID-19. If we can get good digital policies in place in Africa that are more or less consistent across the continent, it will really be a huge advantage for Africa. We see digital trade popping up in the Middle East and the EU and Asia and other parts. And so Africa does have an opportunity to really stand out. And so if it can be addressed to the AFCFTA, that'd be great. And we know that USTR is going to focus on this during the bilateral negotiations with Kenya as well. And of course, we're hoping that once concluded, it paved the way for additional FTAs with African countries. So we see great opportunities. Digital technology is more than just IT companies. It's really all types of companies, important component, and this is an opportunity for Africa to really jump out ahead.
Excellent. Thank you for that remark. We have just a little bit of time. I'm going to see if I can fit in just two quick questions here. We have, Wankele, some suggestions that are being made by Steve Landay of Manchester Trade about some key benchmarks that AFCFTA could do. So, for example, will you announce a completion date for when you have a critical mass of ratifications? I know there are already at 29 countries, I think 28 or 29. Another point is when, completing the origin, the rules of origin, when will that be done? Another one that's mentioned is publishing on the internet the regulations and the tariff rates when they go into effect. And so, we'll have more time beyond this panel today, but I wondered if you could just touch on a couple of those, just the idea of, will you be announcing key benchmarks for the AFCFTA as they happen? And then I have to just say that, I hope that you will look to CCA as a partner, and our members like Manchester Trade and so many others, Procter and Gamble and Caterpillar and Ethiopian Airlines and so many that are participating today, to allow us to help push the word out there that the AFCFTA has taken yet another step in actually implementing the AFCFTA. Just a brief comment on this.
Yes, thank you very much again, Flori. My dear friends, Steve, I owe him a phone call. I will call him back. On rules of origin, yes, rules of origin outstanding. Because of COVID-19, we couldn't progress. On the rest of the package, on market access, we couldn't progress because of COVID-19, but we have proposed a roadmap that will take us to conclusion of on those particular areas. And I think that it's very, very important that as we lead up to the new trading date, that we conclude the work on rules of origin, on market access and ratification. I'm very, very optimistic about ratification. I think that many, many countries in Africa, look, 55 countries, 54 signed the agreement. 28 countries have ratified in less than 2 years. I don't think that we have seen, not only in the African Union, but nowhere in the world have we seen such rapid progress towards ratification. To me, this underscores the political commitment, the political will to get this done. So post-COVID-19, we will resume our work of getting African countries to ratify, whether we are talking about regional economic communities or individual countries. I would like to pick up on 1 or 2 points that Jeff made, which I think are absolutely critical. Digitization. Digitization, if Africa is to mount a formidable response to the fourth industrial revolution, we must be prepared to answer questions around 3D printing. the Internet of Things, data mobility, the questions and the issues that Demetrios raised earlier. We've got to confront these issues because for me, they are directly linked to Africa's industrial development. Whether you're talking about digital industrial development or manufacturing, these questions around the fourth industrial revolutions are directly linked. And so when we talk about digitization, in my mind, it's not only about e-commerce, it is digitization of trade in general. As my friend from UNECA, David Luke, always says, it is digitization of trade. And so I think as Africans, we've got to confront this challenge. And I believe that unlike any other free trade agreement in the world, we actually have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to codify responses that are forward-looking, that will take us beyond the fourth industrial revolution in terms of Africa's preparedness for the fourth industrial revolution and the disruptions that it may bring. And so I want to assure everybody, I want to assure my fellow panelists that, as the heads of state said, Africa remains committed. As a matter of fact, Africa is willing to redouble efforts to implement this agreement. This is our recovery plan. This is our economic recovery plan year on year. We don't have $3 trillion to re-inject dynamism in our economy. The dynamism in our economy will be re-injected by boosting intra-Africa trade significantly beyond 18%. And that's what this African continental free trade area is all about, including, by the way, including the single African air traffic market. Because if we cannot have interconnectivity in Africa, if we cannot have airlines able to facilitate trade in Africa, we're not going to achieve our objectives. And so this protocol, the single African air transport market that was signed in 2018, facilitates greater liberalization in air traffic services. And so I am very optimistic about a post-COVID-19 Africa and about the recovery of Africa post-COVID-19.
Thank you. I'm going to take that, Wamkele, as your message to us, your final message to us on the importance of trade, both intra-African trade and Africa's trade with the US, and how it will impact a resilient post-COVID recovery. Thank you very much. Let me turn to each of the other three panelists for just the final word. I was going to ask Mr. Gabriel the question that had come in about the single African air transport market, but we don't have time for that. And Wamkele, you've really touched on it. Let me just ask Mr. Gabriel, Mr. Triska, and Mr. Hardy, just a minute each. What is your sort of final a message that you would like to get out about trade on the continent and trade in the US, and how you think that we can support it and contribute to a more resilient Africa and a more robust US-Africa trade relationship? Mr. Gabriel, you're on mute. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Flori. I think in my perspective, what Mr. Wamkele is leading CFTA, the SFCFTA is very important. We have to work on that, and we have to be all committed towards its success, governments, companies, and the entire society, because it makes us stronger as a bloc. And also it gives a very good opportunity for partners like the US, because most of the US companies, as you know, Flori, they find the African market so fragmented, small and fragmented. And you know, it's very difficult to invest in this country or that country because that country by itself, the market size is very small and economies of scale comes to question. So when we put our resources together, we interact or trade with our partners as a bloc like the European Union, then we get stronger, and it will also be good opportunity for our partners like the US. Along with that, I think we have to work on logistics. Logistics is a very, very important. Sea freight, air freight, surface transport within the continent, these are very, very important. If we are going to move people around, if we are going to move goods around, and capital around, services around, then we need logistics. So, yeah, so I think my message to African governments who are hearing us here in the forum or elsewhere, important attention to aviation, because aviation is a value creator, an important economic engine for economic development, socio-economic development, but attention is lacking in Africa. Aviation is not getting the attention it deserves, because with 3 or 4 kilometers of a runway, a country can connect with the rest of the world. But unfortunately, that is missing. So
thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Those are important final words on the importance of aviation as a critical sector. Vilo.
Yes, yes. So let me try to be quick. I think, the young continent with the huge youth population strategically located in the middle of the shipping lanes between Europe, Asia, and both Americas, is greatly positioned for future success. And I think, we all need to work together to create resilient Africa. I think, as I said, we need to avoid temptations of protectionism. As we go through the COVID crisis, we'll need to focus on protecting lives as well as preserving economies. And hopefully with the AFCFTA, we're going to create a lot of opportunities for future growth. I agree with Mr. Tewode that there needs to be further investment into infrastructure and creation of infrastructure, not only the air infrastructure, but I think also the physical infrastructure to improve intra-Africa navigation. And I can say that probably for the whole private sector, we stand ready to work with the governments to not just identify, but also deliver and execute on those opportunities going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vilo. Jeff, last minute, your message to us on trade within Africa and with the US.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Caterpillar is so focused on helping our customers build a better world. Infrastructure is really a foundation for growth, and Africa needs infrastructure, has so many opportunities for it. Trade is critical to provide the needs and means to build that infrastructure. Trade agreements are critical to set the rules and regulations and really open up access to markets. So the AFCFTA is going to be very important for driving intra-continental trade. The US-Kenya bilateral trade agreement is hopefully going to open doors for other agreements as well if it's really negotiated well. We see great opportunities. Digital, I want to emphasize, is important, but we're very optimistic that there's going to be good movement in trade policy, because it looks like African leaders are so committed to wanting to do the right thing and really focus on development of the continent, and we're there to help support that.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you to all the panelists for this excellent discussion on trade and building a resilient US-Africa post-COVID relationship, using trade as an engine for economic growth, both on the continent and here in the US as well. Let me make some closing remarks for the forum as a whole, our entire 4 days. I'm delighted to note that we had over 2,500 registered participants for the CCA Leaders Forum. We also live streamed on over 300 Africa-related news sites, and it attracted well over 100,000 views daily. We're very excited about that. What a wonderful high note to end on for our 4-day Leaders Forum. A special thanks to His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of Kenya, and His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo, President of Ghana, for honoring us with their participation today. I also want to say thank you to President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and President Filipe Nyusi of Mozambique, who joined us earlier during our Leaders Forum. Thanks again to all of you who have participated. Now, only 6 months ago, we were on track for a very different June. CCA was busy planning for our 13th US-Africa Business Forum in Marrakech, Morocco, scheduled for earlier this month. The government of Morocco could not have been a more gracious and enthusiastic partner, and we had tremendous support from within the private sectors and governments in the United States and Africa, as well as from the US Embassy in Rabat and the consulate in Casablanca. I'm grateful to these stakeholders and partners and assure you and everyone, all our listeners that are participating in the forum today, that we are determined to reschedule the Morocco summit as soon as it is safe to do so. In an astonishingly short period of time, COVID-19 has changed our lives and our world. Africa has gone from growth projections higher than the global average at the start of 2020 to facing its first recession in 25 years. This month alone, COVID-19 cases on the continent have doubled. Thankfully, COVID-related mortality on the continent has not been as bad as in other parts of the world, or as some predicted. We can all hope that it stays just that way. CCA's Leaders Forum has been our way to provide a high-level platform when it is most critical that US and African government and private sector leaders collaborate, not only to fight COVID-19, but to strategize to ensure Africa's economic recovery and to drive resilient US-Africa business engagement post-COVID. Throughout the 4 days of our Leaders Forum, we have explored the theme of resiliency in the face of an unprecedented pandemic. On Tuesday, we had the honor of hosting His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, and an outstanding panel that discussed different ways Africa can harness the financial resources needed to create fiscal space to effectively combat and recover from COVID-19. This included a lively debate about the role of debt service suspension on Wednesday, and we hosted His Excellency Filipe Nyusi, President of Mozambique, and a dynamic panel that day that explored economic and health innovations in fighting the pandemic. And then yesterday, on Thursday, the panel looked at the drivers of growth in post-COVID-19 Africa. USAID Deputy Administrator Bonnie Glick highlighted the US government's role in helping to create the conditions for this new future. And today we had an excellent trade discussion, and we're honored again to hear from the presidents of Kenya and Ghana. So here are some of my takeaways quickly from the week. First, like the rest of the world, Africa is in the midst of an unprecedented health and economic crisis, which may still be in an early stage. Second, that said, Africa has an impressive story to tell of resiliency and leadership. Many governments have responded quickly and decisively. The 4 presidents who joined our Leaders Forum told of how they have made the difficult balance between lives and livelihoods to keep their economies moving forward while mitigating the pandemic's effects, and they've done so with significant success. Third, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is more important than ever. The AFCFTA should help attract investment, promote intra-African trade and manufacturing, and increase Africa's position in regional and global value chains that should build wealth and help post-pandemic recovery. The African Union's creation of a single African platform to procure health-related products internationally is a good example of new joint action on the part of Africa. The African Union envoys, 2 of whom joined us this week, are proving effective at building support for continent-wide solutions. Partnerships are now more important than ever. Multilateral institutions are providing critical financial and technical support. Bilateral partners have stepped up, including, of course, the United States, even as we grapple with our own COVID crisis. New initiatives and institutions such as Prosper Africa, the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, and the U.S.-Kenya Free Trade Agreement talks lay a strong foundation for U.S.-Africa partnership. Africa is not looking for handouts, but for long-term partners that will enable it to create the fiscal space needed to get back to its path of growth. 6, the private sector has a critical role to play. U.S. and African businesses are adapting and finding new sources of resiliency. The digital economy has emerged as even more critical. Companies and institutions have adopted new innovative financing strategies. African companies are producing their own PPE and testing kits. They are looking at ways to become more self-sufficient in the production of pharmaceuticals and manufacturing in general, while increasing their participation in global value chains. And last, post-COVID Africa, like in the rest of the world, will likely lead to new priorities and new opportunities. We should expect to see a greater emphasis on the healthcare and digital sectors. We may also see a greater focus on improving business climates, efforts to ensure that Africa's precious resources are not wasted through corruption, and new public-private partnerships needed to help economies get back on their feet and promote inclusive growth. As one of our speakers said this week, this is a period when we need to reimagine society. I hope that the Leaders Forum has helped you understand this new world we are in and to discover these new opportunities. I have learned a great deal myself and come out more hopeful about a post-COVID Africa that is more resilient and even more open to the opportunity for US-Africa engagement that benefits African and American businesses, people, and our countries. Once again, many thanks for joining us this week, and a special thanks to our generous sponsors and media partners. Thanks to all our panelists over the last 4 days. You have given us so much to think about. We appreciate all the great work you are doing in these trying times. And I absolutely must say, in terms of my CCA team, thank you, each of you, for your work that you have done behind the scenes, working so hard to make sure that we did a great job on this forum and in putting this whole event together. Thank you so much. I so appreciate each and every one of you. To all our attendees, we are deeply grateful for your support to Corporate Council on Africa. Please call on us if we can be helpful as you move forward. We look forward to having you join us in July for our next webinar series entitled Blended Finance, Catalyst for Africa's Post-COVID-19 Economic Recovery. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay well, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.